My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, a podcast where I, your host, try to give you some tips on how you can explain all this weird, wild, crazy conspiracy stuff to the people you love most. Because that's what I've been trying to do for the past 10 years with no success.
I've been telling everybody that our government is shady, but every time I do, my family thinks I'm crazy. The hollow earth, UFOs, aliens invading, fluoride in the water, they swear skies daily. When I talk about these things, they think I'm crazy. There's no escaping anymore the evil that we're facing. Illuminati mind control, they're sacrificing babies. The end of days, but anyways, my family thinks I'm crazy.
What, they don't want to listen to you?
No, they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. They're just like, oh, here we go, Mark. Off again with your...
Mark being Mark again.
Yeah. So, you know, that's the thing about podcasts is when you're on the air, and it's like therapy, you know? If I can't talk to my family about this stuff, I'll talk to you, Matt, and all our listeners.
You'll just tell your whole podcast.
Yeah. So who are we talking about today, Matt?
They think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. My family thinks that I'm crazy.
A great Promethean lie has been told that technology is external, cold, and metallic. This Saturnian tech has usurped our awareness as it attempts to siphon the God-given organic Gaia consciousness link that once united the creative and active forces of this realm. The natural forces and elements are conscious forms that interact with those whose karma is deserving, those who can guide these tutelary energies back into right relationship in order to tame the wild outcomes of the storm sphere and convict them to their proper role. Today's guests are biodynamically blazing their own path towards greater symmetry and harmony with our natural world. Dr. Barre, Lando, and Mike Winner of Alfa Vedic join me, Mystic Mark, here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy this episode with Dr. Barre, Lando, and Mike Winner.
Really comes down to disconnection from spirit, from source, from self. And there unfortunately are occulted circles that try to hack the system, try to take a shortcut around who they really are. You know, some would relate that all the way back to the quote unquote fall of man. And we've been sort of dealing with the repercussions of this ever since. And, you know, it really just comes down to the Great Awakening, which I feel is happening right now. I feel like there is a split in sort of, I hate to say the whole 5D thing, because that's overused way too much, but there does seem to be an overlay of reality happening right now where there is a sort of different dimensional shift of awareness.
The most amazing element that we take for granted every day. And then the informational fields of the biodynamic formula that I use on my plants are literally programmed into that water. So very much different than just dumping a bunch of organic fertilizer on your plants. You're giving them more refined informational fields. You're doing it within that biodynamic formula that goes back to a Steiner understanding. And you're also using water in its most elevated state. You know, water, any alchemist will tell you, can be put through processes and raised energetically and actually turned into different processes, even though it still looks like water, that make us an inseparable part of all of nature. And,
I find that the awareness has shifted. People are beginning to realize that there's a mystery, there's a puzzle to be solved, and it's in their own backyards, and they're connecting with the energy of the landscape. And for different people, it results in different things. You know, we've had excellent conversations with different people on this show, just talking about the discoveries they've made in their own backyard. But I'm curious to start, you know, what drew you to this particular area in Northern California that you both find yourselves at, this farm? You guys are growing some amazing crop there. You guys have some, what seems like really intelligent biodynamic protocols that you're using to create a really good relationship between yourselves and the plant world. So if you could tell us how you were magnetically drawn there.
Mike, should we flip a coin, or what do you want to do here?
You're the man that got me up there, so you start.
Okay. Hey, Mark, thanks for having us here in the first place. So good to meet you and good to talk to you. Always good to make a new friend, and especially if it's somewhere else in the world, because it's, to me, a sign of the times that like spirits, kindred spirits are all finding each other. So that's a very positive thing.
Agreed.
So what brought me to this area? I was born and raised here. So I guess that would be a good starter. I was actually grew up just a little bit south, but in Northern California. And so this is slightly north of where I grew up. So it's very familiar to me. We like this area just on a personal level because it has proximity to the seacoast. And, but we're far enough inland, so we're out of the fog belt. And in this particular location, we're up a remote river canyon, so it takes a little bit of a doing to drive up here. Oh, we just lost Mike, it looks like. And it's the cleanest, most pristine river in the country, we believe, and a lot of people agree. There's springs everywhere. The weather is wonderful. We have our monsoon season and get more rain in the Amazon rainforest when it's raining. But it's not that extreme Pacific Northwest north of us where it's just drizzly and gray. It's like monsoon, and then you just go into gorgeous 7 months. And we live in a very fertile river area here. My wife and myself, this is our third off-grid farm that we've developed. This one we believe will, well, who knows? We kind of believe it's our final one, not because of our age, but because, it just has everything we've been looking for our entire life. And we can grow everything here. And Mother Nature is very cooperative with us here. The other thing is where we grew up just a little bit south of here. Unfortunately, a lot of people found it and it's getting more developed. And, so we just kept moving a little bit north to more pristine surroundings. Our first off-grid farm was actually in Hawaii, because when we moved initially from where we grew up, we decided, because of my surfing addiction, to live in Hawaii and also to raise our kids there. So we had a very long stretch, many years, came back to the mainland, in about 99 to get the kids through college. They're, well into life now themselves. And then finally came full circle to where we grew up, the redwoods, the ocean, the rivers, the mountains. To me, I'm biased, but it doesn't get any better than these remote areas of the West Coast. And here on the West Coast, in this particular location, we're about 10 hours north of the Bay Area. So there's a big buffer from all that civilization. The next big hub up north is Portland, and that's about 6, hours up there. And we're in this little area that the Native Americans call the Klamath Knot. And it's a confluence of many mountain ranges and rivers, and it's not amenable to development in any way. So I think that's probably what I could say is the final reason as far as why we're here. And we're totally off grid, no power lines, no cell service, anything for miles and miles, which is the way we like it.
Wow. And that unfortunately is so foreign to me. As I told you earlier, I'm in Connecticut, and you could easily describe where I live as being a sort of organ of the New York City, Boston, Philadelphia megalopolis, right? I mean, you could even see it on the map. You look at it and it's like this scab on the earth of pavement and brick, and sure, cities have their benefits, but I'd much rather be in the Klamath Knot. That sounds incredible. So it's an arrangement of mountains. It's a confluence of rivers. And the Native Americans, I'm sure, had some folklore that's been passed on. Is there any other interesting things you've learned outside of what they referred to the area as? Their culture, their habits, the type of people that lived there?
Yeah, there's a lot of mythology, of course, but I believe the mythology is based mostly in truth. Everybody has a Bigfoot story. The Native Americans have no doubt, and they'll just tell you they communicate, and it's a normal thing. There are species of animals here. For instance, we went out a little bit ago at night to check on some things, and there's this big, huge thing, and it's a giant salamander. And this salamander, you won't see, I don't think, any place else on Earth as far as that size. And then people that we know, I haven't seen them myself, they say if you get up further into the mountains here and into these remote lakes where nobody's ever been, you'll see these salamanders that are 7-8 feet long. You just see species of wild cats a lot of big animals, elk, bear, bald eagles, just, there's a nest right up there. We just see them swarming. The wildlife is off the hook. I've never seen any place like this. So it's unique in that way. And where we live, it's a little settlement with just about maybe 12 homesteaders. And what's nice is the homesteaders are all doing things right. It's not a funky out in the country, old cars on a landscape. Everybody takes pride in maintaining the ecosystem, having their nice little place, being self-sufficient. We all know of each other because, we're spread out. You can't see each other. So we're cooperative if somebody's in a jam, but at the same time, we all respect that we're out here for the same reason, which is to, not that we don't like people, but to get away from the crowds and that, we respect each other's privacy. So I don't know of too many places left on this planet that, fit all those parameters that we were looking for. And best of all, right now, the weather's pretty warm here this time of year, and we have amazing swimming holes. So I just go down the stairs from where my farm is, and it's just crystal clear water, 20, 30-foot pools, it's simply amazing. Abundant in trout, in the wintertime, and other times of the year, you have steelhead and salmon that run up here, still very strong. Mike comes up here and poaches fish out of my swimming and fishing hole here all the time. And he lives just a little bit over range here. I can see out my window into a settlement called Gasky, and he's back. So I'll let him tell you all about that.
Tell us a little bit about where you're at, Mike. Dr. Barre just filled us in on his whereabouts.
Oh, cool. Sorry, guys. My internet is totally screwed right now. That's one of the problems with living out in the boonies, but I got to go get a new modem. We don't
typically use the video for my podcast, so we could, if it helps the connection, you can turn the video off and maybe we'll all have a more fidelity with the audio.
Okay. Do you typically on YouTube and stuff, you don't show the video?
Well, seems to be okay. Cases like this, I make like a cool graphic that'll just play over our audio. So,
well, let's just keep try it now. Cool. Yeah. Cool. I actually have fast internet here. It's just my modem. I got word from Spectrum. I got to go switch it out. It's dated or something. So I'm going to town today to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So Barre filled you in on the majesty of living on the Smith River, I'm sure, and the off-grid nature of the farm and all the beautiful wildlife and Sasquatch that comes to visit us. Yeah. So I was attracted to this land as soon as I came and camped here with my family back in 2015-ish, living in LA. We knew we had to get out. I was tired of being worrying about the fall of Los Angeles and bug out bags and what's going to happen when the hordes come a knocking when the water's gone. So I knew that water is key. Water is essential to life and to happiness and everything. And the Smith River is I would argue, and I think this is not even arguable, it's the cleanest waterway in North America, or at least in the United States, continental United States. So that was a huge, huge part of my reason for moving here. And we found this awesome little town. It's like a throwback to the 1970s. My kids just get to ride their bikes and go off and do whatever they need to do during the day and play out in nature. And I don't have to worry about Child Protective Services being called. So it was kind of a no-brainer to come here and really, embrace country life. I became a volunteer firefighter as a means to connect to the community quickly. And that's been very rewarding and challenging and kind of life-changing. And couldn't be happier. As I say on our podcast, I kiss the ground every morning I wake up here.
Mm. Yeah, and no, I love hearing about this stuff. I've worked on a farm. I've milked cows, but currently where I'm at right now, I have no room outside of the indoor space to grow. I could probably set up a hydroponic situation, but yeah, it's absolutely a pleasure hearing you guys describe these idyllic sort of areas. And obviously when you're that remote, you don't have any prying eyes. I'm sure you can innovate as well, because like I said, I can't really even grow in my front yard. There's people who have property who can't grow gardens on their front lawn because of HOAs and, community rules and things like that, right? And it's just ludicrous, but in the light of advancing agriculture, advancing our relationship with the natural world, have you guys worked out any solutions to common problems that people have when they're going about this type of thing, homesteading, growing? I mean, you talk about the Smith River. I've been reading a little bit from Victor Schauberger lately and all the things he's covered with water. Are you utilizing any what would seem like advanced techniques in these remote locations with your farming operation, with your growing?
Yeah, you want me to take it, Mike?
Yeah, you're the guy who introduced me to Schauberger 15 years ago. Take it away.
Okay. All right. Yeah, he's one of my heroes. You know, he's, of course, noted as the Tesla of water. And he lived out in the boonies as a forester in Austria and learned by watching trout in the stream, and then by understanding what trout were able to do by just staying stationary in a fast moving current, just by movement within their gills. He discovered the implosion technology, which he had then applied to creating waterways, aqueducts that actually go up a grade, you know, without any power source. And then also how to create vehicles that levitate, you know, that are so-called anti-gravitational. I use gravitational as a loosely because gravity is not a real force as you and I were taught in school. It's one polarity, and then of course the other polarity is levity. So he understood those two opposing forces, and then how a trout simply used those two forces to its advantage, and how we can apply that to agriculture, to moving water around on the planet anywhere we want without no fuel or mechanization. So quite a remarkable individual. One of the things I do on the farm here is I have a Vortex Technology, and I make nutrient teas. I have a biodynamic formula that I created, and I put it in this very large cyclone-looking vat, and it doesn't just spin it like a blender, but you have air pumped in at different vantage points that create an implosion technique that then restructures the water, opens up the what are very magical elements, or things in the water that most people don't even understand. It's the most amazing element that we take for granted every day. And then the informational fields of the biodynamic formula that I use on my plants are literally programmed into that water. So very much different than just dumping a bunch of organic fertilizer on your plants. You're giving them more refined informational fields. You're doing it within that biodynamic formula that goes back to, a Steiner understanding. And you're also using water in its most elevated state. Water, any alchemist will tell you, can be put through processes and raised energetically and actually turned into different processes, even though it still looks like water. So that's what the implosion technology does. The other thing is that it creates an abundance of microorganisms in this technology, which are what the soil needs in order to break down the minerals and make them available to the rootlets of the plants. Also, these microorganisms, the more plentiful they are and the more you work with them and assure that they multiply constantly, they become a communication system between our own gut biome and our bodies. There's no separation if you understand the waveform, channels of communication that make us an inseparable part of all of nature, and, with the fungi and everything else. So there's a lot going on there. And when you understand all of that, then you can unlock all those potentials, use them to your advantage, but most important, really unlock the awareness within your own spirit and, discover why we're here in the first place.
Well, yeah, and that seems to be essential to getting into all this stuff. But for people who maybe have a property where they can pull something like this off, or maybe even not, and they're in a city like me, do you need the water quality to be as pure as it obviously is in a remote place like that? Or could you work with, some water that's been polluted and restructure it and make it more valuable than it currently is?
Well, I mean, you can so where I'm at, our town pulls water from the Smith River, but it does go through a treatment because there are, normies here that feel like it needs to be somewhat cleaned. And, obviously there's concerns about bacteria and how the bacteria actually works. So this is a huge problem, obviously, with mainstream modern thinking. We kill everything because the way science works is it looks at everything dead to understand it. So we think in order to be, to be safe, we have to have everything dead. So what I do is when I'm not using collected rainwater or pulling directly from the Smith myself, because I'm about 2,000 yards up from the Middle Fork, I actually have a pretty good filtration system. And then I go through a structuring device. I need to get some of those implosion devices, Barre, but I do have some structuring devices I added to my hose bib, which are pretty interesting, that our friend Justin Franson offers through his company. And so I'm trying that out right now. So I filter, and then these are supposedly structuring devices, and this is what I use when I'm not using rainwater for my garden. So I would say, yes, it's not going to be the same than like pulling out like we have at the farm at Alfa Vedic, where we're literally pulling out of the Smith River, which is naturally structured and super refined, natural, brilliant, conscious water. However, yeah, you do what you can in the city. I am a huge fan of collecting rainwater. If you can collect rainwater, that is a fantastic thing to do in the city. And then you can structure it. You can get a Vortex machine and do that yourself easily on your property, like what we have at the farm, and make your own teas. And I do all sorts of stuff like, what's it called? Butaki, which is a Japanese style fermented tea that is anaerobic. You can do all sorts of stuff in a city to grow. Vertical growing is a great option for you, even if you have a small patio. And you could do cool rainwater collection where that water kind of comes down through the vertical growing tubes. I've seen some really cool systems set up where they're growing enough food for a neighborhood in, I don't know, Barre, a couple 100 square feet. I mean, there's that one farm we talk about, a family farm in Pasadena, California, where they are a full functioning professional farm. And how much property do they actually have, Barre? It's not much.
It's a postage stamp. It's a little old style normie suburban neighborhood with, a customary yard space, and that's it. And they have animals, they have, a complete ecosystem, and they provide enough food for their whole extended family that now lives there. They have an internet business, and they take all their stuff to the farmer's market.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say, Mark, about the HOAs and all this stuff, and how they, in America, especially in suburbia, it's like there's an expectation to see beautiful lawns and pruned roses versus, a food forest in your front yard. Like our friend Jim Gale, has a mission to do, is convert all these lawns into food forests. I think there are ways we talk about on our podcast where you can, through lawful remedy, if you own your own land, you can get around that and you can give them the finger and grow food. You just have to know how to go about it. And if you are stuck in an HOA, it's also like, what are your priorities in life? For me, my priorities were to get out of LA, to get up here so I could have a food forest, which I now have in my front yard here, because I knew that was what I wanted in my life. So once again, manifestation, law of attraction. What do you really want in your life?
Right.
If you really, if it's a priority for you to grow amazing food, you will find yourself in an amazing environment to do so.
Agreed. Yeah. And well said. I really only had that reference off the top of my head because I was on a podcast the other day and I was arguing with someone about their lawn, and their cop out was, well, I have a HOA and I can't grow food on my lawn. But anyways, we won't drag that argument into this wonderful conversation. I'm wondering about something that you mentioned, Mike. You said that science studies death to understand life. And this reminds me of something I read recently in a very strange journal. I should mention the only reason I'm even looking through a journal like this is because I'm studying Skull and Bones, a group outside of or from Yale University, and I don't live that far from them. So they've been an interest of mine studying this group, and one of their idols, much like Schauberger is someone we would all look up to. They look up to a guy named George Hegel. And George Hegel is a pretty influential philosopher from Germany in the 19th century. And his belief was that, death creates life in this sort of inverted way. He saw it that, well, death creates the fertilizer that then becomes, new life, right? It's a sort of backwards twisted logic, and they almost explain it in a way that makes less sense than you and I would initially think, because that kind of makes sense, right? I mean, all life creates death, and there's a sort of cycle. We get that. But it's pretty obvious after the past 100 or so years that this philosophy has undermined our relationship with the natural world. It's added to this kill or be killed, survival of the fittest modality, which is not how an ecosystem truly works. I mean, you guys have your hands in an actual ecosystem. You've created one where you live. You're using all of the different aspects of the biome to your advantage. It's counterintuitive based on, everything our modern agriculture teaches us. It seems like it's a very death-centric culture. And I'm wondering, where do you guys see this evolving and how? Because I want to see more people like yourselves taking a life approach, a living approach to this type of work. But, with chemical pesticides and all these other things, it's a very death-centric approach to these sciences. It's all about killing the pests and giving the best nutrients, but they're not the best. They're just overkill. They're oversaturating it with nitrogen or whatever else they think is gonna create the best concoction of soil. It's yeah, I don't know, kind of rambling here. Save me, Dr. Bear.
Okay, I'll give it a stab. What we're experiencing now with the Monsantos and all the extreme death cult practices, because it is a death cult, are the logical or illogical progression of just going down one path, one of the two paths that nature provides. Now, when you're in the practice of medicine, like Chinese medicine, there's two sides, the yin, the yang, the shen, the ko cycle, one nurtures, one seemingly destroys it, like that one person you're referencing that says, well, nature kills so that things could be recreated. Well, there is some truth to that. If you go up to the progenitor effects that actually come for our thoughts and, as creators of this realm in the first place, every thought creates a polarization of electrical forces, and then it steps down through the ethers and all the different levels that we experience on the ground here to see nature. We have been for a while controlled by those harmonic influences where science has chosen to go down the materialistic reductionist realm. There was a time when true scientists, which we now refer to as alchemists, understood both sides of the coin, and more importantly, understood their role as being in the central pivotal fulcrum point of those polarities, which is some people call the Christ consciousness. It doesn't matter what you call it. And in their endeavors of science, what they did was create in order to heal. All of the early alchemists were involved in the healing arts. Now our so-called scientists are actually in part of the death cult, in that they're taking things from the earth in order to manufacture for profit, manufacturing weaponry, manufacturing medicine that is designed to kill rather than understand what they're killing is actually would be part of the solution if they knew how to work with it. So we had this great imbalance. And of course, the folks that have gone totally into those harmonic channels, now they're just playing and deviously trying to kill everybody, kill all life on the planet in the name of control, because they are the most fearful amongst mankind in the first place. Mike, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, yeah, no, you pretty much summed it all up perfectly. Rudolf Steiner, was brilliant in showing and illustrating these different extreme polarities. And I guess it really comes down to disconnection from spirit, from source, from self. And there unfortunately are occulted circles that tried to hack the system, try to take a shortcut around who they really are. Some would relate that all the way back to the quote unquote fall of man. And we've been sort of dealing with the repercussions of this ever since. And, it really just comes down to the Great Awakening, which I feel is happening right now. I feel like there is a split in sort of, I hate to say the whole 5D thing, because that's overused way too much, but there does seem to be an overlay of reality happening right now where there is a sort of different dimensional shift of awareness happening. And so literally there are people on the 3D right now that are still existing in this sort of Ahrimanic influence, this materialistic reductionist separation from spirit. And then there are those like ourselves here, because I've listened to you a bunch, Mark, and I know where you're coming from, and I really see you resonating in the new reality that literally are moving into a new world, which will crystallize into a whole new 3D form, and that will be the new world we're existing in. And with that, we'll get back to core principles of nature, the dual waveform of nature, which is life, death, life, death. And so in that, with respect for nature and respect as the divine creators that we are, we'll have living systems that will regenerate and will basically live in harmonious conjunction with the divine, right? The divine will of the creator, versus the current system that's been going on since the quote unquote fall that has been trying to deny the creator, which is trying to hack the creator's, creative flow through ego and through the will force in the mental plane, the disconnection from the heart. And so this is a brilliant time to be alive because we all get to experience this if we choose to. If you choose not to, and you choose to deny the creator, deny the divine force that's happening right now, you're just going to suffer more and more in normie world.
Wow. Yeah, well said, Dr. Barre and Mike. Both of you made excellent points. And I want to circle back to something that you mentioned, Dr. Barre, Lando, about how this medicine they're giving us is really, aimed to harm us, not heal us. And maybe I'm still drawing connections. I was just researching a lot of Skull and Bones material, but one of the theories that's really formed out of researching this is that the Native American consciousness, the shamanic influence, that shamanic plant medicine relationship, it was almost sterilized and then repackaged or reprogrammed, because we see this influence that Yale, Harvard, and the other Ivy League schools have, and Oxford and Cambridge as well. We can't forget about the old world schools. They have this tremendous influence on our culture, and especially the roaring, 1900s when drugs were just ubiquitous and really used in an unregistered, unchecked way. And yeah, now we're living in a world where people don't even understand that these things were living beings in the first place. They just imagine some laboratory where people just pour beakers, of green liquids into vials. They don't have the concept that, no, these guys go out into the forest, they find plants that have these qualities, and then they turn them into these pills, right? And it's such a denatured way to go about healing. How do we begin to, take that back and teach people about whole plant medicine? I mean, we're living in a world where people are so looking for a quick fix. They're often turned off by plant medicines. It's a personal matter for me. My grandfather has cancer and I smoke cannabis every day. I wish he would be warmed up to it, but he's a conservative. He's a Fox News guy. He's an old school firefighter from Connecticut, never ever did a drug once, unless you count alcohol. So, it's hard for me to talk him into trying even something like CBD because he's so averse to it.
Well, the dark side of the force has really mastered the old two-step into materialism. So as you say, pharmaceuticals, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them have their roots in botanical sources, But then as they extract through standardization and then synthesize from what once were natural elements and then just go down that path exclusively, pretty soon you're in the world of synthetics. You've lost the full spectrum effects that Mother Nature understands the synergy of how things work together. It's like taking our bodies apart, just putting a liver on the tabletop and expecting a human being to work. It's just they all have a synergy, they all have a purpose, but they are all congealed energy at the same time. It's all matter, including plant forms and all the three kingdoms of nature. We're nothing but congealed energy. So when you understand more the energetic origins of everything, it again gets us to the thought forms and the intentions of the creator. And then you finally have that, plant that we might use medicinally as food, whatever. There's a whole energetic completeness. Now we try to pick it apart. Now there can be some value in that. And that, as the old alchemist did, is they pick things apart, but they never lost sight of the whole. And their whole endeavor was to purify the parts and then put them back together and know how nature puts things together in the first place. So that mimicked the so-called Ascension process. It not only, fulfilled their ability to do what they knew they had the right to do, which is to make things even better because we are co-creators, and then also make it a spiritual practice to link up with what they were doing so that it had important consequences on their own consciousness that was now growing awareness as far as how our bodies, how our being was going through a similar ascension process at the same time. When I was in naturopathic college, I had to take a course the first semester, and it was a history of naturopathy, and they felt it very important. Naturopathic colleges don't do this anymore, by the way. They've all been captured and standardized. But back then we had to take this course as freshmen, and it told us about the history of medicine in this country. And the fact is naturopaths were the prominent physicians, for a long period of our early history. And then with the Rockefeller medicine, which will bring you back into your Yaleys and all those folks that you're studying. And of course, they're offshoots of the Royal Society in Europe, who just woke up one day, I guess, and thought that they had a right to kill everybody else and control the planet. So we call that eugenics. And of course, they go way back. They didn't just wake up to that. This is an agenda that's been in operation for a long time. So now you have the Rockefellers as their point man in America, and they, with their influence, they buy off Congress and, your local bureaucrats. Next thing, they're incarcerating doctors that are doing nothing but helping people. They've got, control of all the schools, the media, and they literally burning buildings down, schools and libraries and such, burning books. We see a little bit of that going on again today, right? So that's how we got to this place. So if you ask me, what is the solution? What do we do about it? Well, the three of us are doing what we need to do right now. Is talk about the truth, really alert people. Fact is this little podcast here, the podcast that we do, the composite of all the independent people out there in the new media are kicking the holy crap. The legacy media, Fox News, CNN, all of them combined aren't even getting a fraction of the viewership that all of us are getting collectively. So we're winning. We're absolutely winning. So we're doing what we need to do. The next part is to get control, again, of more of our educational systems, especially those that train health professionals like doctors. Because if your dad was seeing a doctor that had a proper education and clinical experience that proved his education firsthand to him, he would realize that cancer is not even a disease. He would understand that cancer is actually a biological expression of something much deeper, and it was actually meant to heal his mind, body, and spirit. And in that being said, then you understand that the practice of medicine is a very spiritual practice. It's very grounded in that you do what you have to do on the ground to support your body But at the same time, it's about elevating all parts of yourself. That's what medicine was originally intended to do, but now it's become a crisis intervention to lay our fears that have been well cultivated in all of us, which is the fear of death.
Wow. Powerful. Yeah. And I am in resonance with everything you just said. I had an event, crisis event, when I was younger. I was skateboarding down a hill and I fell. I slammed on the pavement and I broke my wrist. And I was taken to the hospital. They asked me if I wanted medication, and I told the doctor, I said, I don't need medication. I have meditation, and I felt really proud of myself, really confident, and to this day, I've never done any pain medication, anything like that. But unfortunately, they convinced me, and I feel like this wasn't necessary, but they convinced me to put a plate in my wrist to fix my wrist. And maybe this isn't your specialty, but I always regretted that. Like, it would have healed on its own. I didn't need this. Now I'm stuck with this thing for the rest of my life. And it just is sort of like a thorn in my side. But if you don't have any thoughts on the implant, I would like to ask you about cancer. But I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this wrist thing as a doctor? Do you think I could get the surgery to get this thing out of there one day?
Well, I understand. I have a little metal in my body. I played combative sports for a long time, probably too long, and did some, damage and have a little bit of titanium in my body. On the other hand, you realize that your body is very adaptive. And your consciousness, again, is congealing your intentions and thought forms every single moment. And your body is no more you than that piece of metal is. And so your thoughts around that, your body, as well as that implant, are going to have no effect on your consciousness, but your consciousness can greatly affect those, and you will live fine with it. As if I just go right into my physician role, what I would do, just to make sure on the ground things are, have every advantage, I would probably go into that area and do some assessment of the meridians and energy channels in that area, maybe do some neural therapy just in case that metal is becoming an energetic impediment to, energy channels, meridians, and there's, ways, neural therapy being one of them, where you can reinstate all those normal pathways and not miss a beat. You can do it with, teeth, when you've had fillings put in teeth, the meridians move through there. So we do that all the time in practice. And it's not a matter of saying, oh, we're screwed because of, something we had done surgically or something. No, it's just giving the body every advantage it needs so that it can adapt and operate with complete normalcy around whatever, changes have been made.
Right. Yeah. And it's easy to forget how fluid our body is. We're energetic beings. And yeah, I hadn't considered that. And, I have had a very groundbreaking Reiki session when I was very young, 17 years old. Somebody did Reiki on me and it completely changed my life. I mean, emotional well-being shifted overnight. But on the point of the implant, I actually have cobalt chrome, not titanium. And I found out that the word cobalt actually is synonymous with the word goblin, because miners would find these like creatures in the mines and they called them cobalts. And I guess when they discovered this mineral cobalt, or this element cobalt, they gave it the same name. So I have a little goblin in my wrist now, it seems. But either way, on the point of cancer, this could be one of the most controversial topics around, and we're not afraid to discuss that here. We've had guests on the show describe different cannabis procedures, things you could do with cannabis to cure certain types of cancer, but you're saying that it's possibly something that can be healed in the causal, spiritual planes, something that has roots in the mental, emotional body rather than being a purely physical ailment?
I'll just say, too, one thing, we use the word cure. We don't want to say cure.
Right.
Go ahead, Bear.
Right. Treatment, right? Is that the preferred?
Well, Bear will explain what I mean here by that.
Okay.
Well, in the case of cancer, when you realize it's really not a disease, then you realize, as Mike says, there's nothing to cure. So now it's just understanding why it's there.
Right.
Boy, I'll go through this as quickly as possible. First off, you have a growth. We'll say it's diagnosed as cancer. This is pure physical plane. And remember, there's always many levels of reality. There's never just one thing in operation. So these are all the things as a physician you have to understand and also address depending on where that person's awareness is that you're trying to support in the first place. So let's just look at a growth on the physical plane. First off, if you get into the works of Steiner and people like that, you understand there's three kingdoms and there's certain energetics that create the anatomy of the mineral, plant, and animal and kingdom, which includes mankind. And when you understand how that energetic congealment happens, then you can look at bodies and see how we go all the way up to the kingdoms through the human, or mankind, we should say, and how we have attributes of everything beneath us, but then go beyond. Now, cancer, when you look at it in that metamorphic way from those primal forces, you see that cancer is an outpicturing of somebody being too much involved in those other kingdoms, and therefore certain growth patterns that are appropriate for the mineral and plant kingdom, but not appropriate. For instance, a plant, you plant it and it keeps growing, right? It doesn't have, these means that just shut off growth. So when you see an unabated growth in an individual man, then it means you have a process of exostosis, which is appropriate for plant development, but maybe not appropriate for mankind's development. And the reason why that kind of growth isn't appropriate, you'd have to understand the spiritual ramifications of why man's anatomy is different and outpictures differently, and then has different attributes above all the other kingdoms. So that gets a little bit into the weeds as far as why a growth now is really mirroring lower kingdoms. And there's very deep spiritual reasons why that happens in, a human body. And understanding how to fix it, then you have to reinstate the rhythms that create our anatomy in the first place. That's where Steiner got into his, different kind of musical therapies and everything. Okay, so let's just get more into the nuts and bolts of physiology. And Mike really understands this and has some good input. So I don't want to gobble up all the time here. Say you have some elements in your body that don't belong there. Maybe you're breathing all the crap, the heavy metals and things that, they're spraying in the air, and the body's elimination systems are overwhelmed. So now you're, instead of just keeping things moving through your body, the body intelligently will sequester things into certain tissues, joints, so forth. And, depending where it is, it'll create symptoms, that we have medical diagnostic terms for. In the case of a growth, you've had maybe something placed in a certain bodily tissue and organ, and now because aggressive steps have not been taken to assist the body to eliminate that, you have anaerobic metabolism, fermentation, and the body says, we got to clean this up. So it starts creating new tissue, because every single cell that grows in that spot that then we later recognize as a growth is a set of lungs that brings in oxygen. And if you know how to work with it just on that physiological level, what's going to happen is it'll clean itself out. And when there's no more reason to have a growth to do that, then the microorganisms that live within inside of us, that are our little partners, they'll already be at the scene of the crime. Then they'll secrete enzymes and things, digest the tumor, it goes away. That's the way things used to happen more readily in bodies when we were less inundated. Now, on another level, and this gets into some of the things we talk about in New German medicine, biology will holographically or fractally manifest or mirror issues that are going on in the psyche. You say you have a traumatic experience that affects your psyche, your emotional being. If you understand the nature of all the possible episodes that can happen within our social interactions or just kind of within our survival instincts, then different bodies or different organs or tissues in the body will play that out. And when you understand a little bit more, it makes perfect sense because they're mirroring that exact issue. And in the case of, say, cancer, it would be true of any other, form of malady in the body, but with cancer alone, it will grow things in order to alleviate the pressure on the psyche that triggered the neurological triggering of a particular part of the body to grow something in the first place. And then when pressure is relieved, it goes full circle. The psyche then is relieved, which is an evolutionary advantage that man has over animals, and that we then can relieve the burden of these insults to our psyche in order to unclutter ourselves for the ascension process. And because a lot of these things are happening unconsciously and we couldn't possibly keep up with them or even be aware of them. So biology comes to the rescue. And when the growth has achieved its purpose, then again, microorganisms and things that the medics might think are dangerous actually digest it, so it goes away. And this kind of stuff used to happen more readily. But now with early detection, early treatment, we catch a growth that maybe we wouldn't even, been aware of before. And then we start poisoning the crap out of ourselves in order to kill the bad guys. Or our bodies are just plain lacking the resources because of all the things we're inundated with these days and the lack of health in the average person's bodies that prevents, those resources in the body just being available and mobilized so that these things could come and go, and then you have unabated growth and problems, epidemic proportions now for all those reasons. Plus, there's a lot of more insults going on to our psyche every single moment. Just look at the headlines.
Wow. Yeah. Well said, Mike. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I mean, kind of hard to follow that.
Well, if I could maybe share what I was thinking as Dr. Barre Lando was sharing that, and thank you, sir. There's this sort of nexus point with drugs, right? We have tobacco being blamed for lung cancer at large. Cigarette smoking, has become very unfashionable, and then cannabis smoke has become more fashionable, right? And some people, like I mentioned earlier, say that cannabis has some healing properties here, and I'm wondering, to your point about this being really largely a problem outside of just the physical domain, it's reaching into our many aspects of ourself. Maybe that's why cannabis has this ability, because it affects our mind, it affects our soul in a sort of curious way. Tobacco, at least here in North America, was always used in prayer and to connect with Creator. And maybe this is just my conspiratorial thinking, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was an objective to using tobacco as opposed to any other smokable herb when they mainstream this Monsanto cigarette, right? So I think there is something going on there where people are being maybe blocked from having a higher understanding of their soul and forced to sort of be unwitting participants in this death cult.
Yeah. I mean, we know tobacco, the chemical constituents in a Marlboro cigarette, there's I don't even know how many countless different carcinogens in there. Pure tobacco, almost nobody smokes. Right. But you're right. There is a shamanic tradition with tobacco. I know ayahuasca ceremonies, for instance, the shaman will blow tobacco in your face. And there's, a lot of wonderful aspects to tobacco. And of course, it was a major crash crop here in the United States and easy to grow. And so they marketed that, and the eugenicists came in and said, oh, hey, here's a great way to kill people. But the tobacco itself, isn't cancer causing that I know of. But of course, if you abuse anything and bring smoke into your lungs, that's not totally natural. I'm sure that is an insult to the biology, and there will be an interplay between your higher mental and emotional selves if you are abusing anything anything, you know? So I guess once again, we get mired in materialism and in reductionism, connecting cancer to cigarettes, cancer to even something like 5G or any of these other ideas, where if we understand who we really are, as Barre was saying, all the multiple planes of that make us as our I am, right? Then if we can get close to some sort of mastery, we don't have to live in fear of any of this stuff. You know, if we understand nature's way and we understand who we are, we can really effortlessly navigate even the most toxic places. But that does take a certain degree of mastery of yourself and spirit and your emotions, especially. You know, I think people have completely lost track of what their emotions are and how they interplay with all these different levels of our consciousness. But yeah, in terms of cannabis, and by the way, Mark, you didn't strike me as one that would engage in cannabis. But
I've been slowly rolling something up right now.
Bob Marley poster in the background. But that being said, you know, someone who enjoys cannabis myself, there's definitely a connection with the heart chakra, right? When you engage in that plant medicine, which I believe is super important these days, where we've had an extreme disconnect from the heart. So there is something definitely empowering to cannabis, and probably why they ran the whole psyop against it in the 1920s with reefer madness and, you know, calling it marijuana, Mary Jane, demonizing it with, you know, Mexicans coming to rape your wife, all that stuff, because it was something that was definitely more of a spiritual sort of awakening when you do imbibe with that, versus something like alcohol. I would say alcohol is the better example of the mainstream drug being pushed in society because of its ability to disconnect us from spirit and really just engage us more in this sort of primordial animal instinct of, you know, right now, I want what I want right now, without really going deep into consciousness. Even alcohol also has, as Barre would rightly, I think, agree with me, as a spirit used in alchemy, has its own amazing attributes. And once again, I think this just comes down to being in balance with who we are, and not over imbibing in anything, and understanding that nature is balance. And when we start to understand ourselves better, then all of these fears about all this materialistic stuff just goes out the window.
Yeah. And, you know, thank you for pointing that out. I should say that my foray into cannabis was unconventional. I was a martial artist and a wrestler in middle school and high school, and I despised alcohol. I despised any sort of intoxication. But then some way, somehow, I found Eddie Bravo, and I know he probably doesn't like me blaming him for it, so I'll say Bruce Lee as well. But Bruce Lee wrote in his book that he used cannabis. He ate hemp, right? And when I read this in one of his books that was designed to run you through some of the workouts he invented himself, I was just perplexed, because my friends, who seemed like total nincompoops, were offering me this weed and trying to smoke with me, and I said, no, I don't want to smoke. But then I found out Bruce Lee had been using it, so I gave it a try, and I found that I liked being high by myself more than I liked being high with my friends, because there's sort of getting a lot of their energy. But when I was able to cultivate this introspection, and, you know, I connected with my heart, there's really no other way to put it than that. I think you summed it up really well, Mike. And another thing that you said that I think is important, and we can maybe branch off into another topic from here, is this concept of fear. And, you know, one of the first ideas in spirituality that I really was drawn to was immortality, right? And I think a lot of people come to this through fear, when really immortality to a certain degree is achievable through mastery, right? People always seem to tell stories of these amazing, you know, fountains of youth, and those people who go and seek them out seem to be like the most fearful, really, at least, you know, they seem outwardly. But with this Zhao Gulan, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, this immortality tea, with the right mastery, you're able to actually, well, I don't know, maybe achieve an incredibly long life. Is this true, or is this just myth?
Well, every plant really used, again, because it's a whole consciousness from the creator, is going to help put the pieces of ourselves back, together again. For instance, cannabis as a example, our heart and our mind, and not suggesting the physical organs, but the mental plane and the emotional plane, but those just being the transmitter receivers for those planes in the physical body. They were never meant to be separate. In the Ascended Master realm, they have a little salutation when they greet each other, which signifies unification of heart and mind. So when you're under the influence of cannabis and, doing it for the right reasons, then you're going to be more apt to experience that unification. There's going to be your sensory polarity, which is represented by your neurology, which is going to be extra acute as far as picking up data from your external environment. And that's why things just seem more vivid, colors and sounds and so forth. At the same time, you're going to be more tapped in with the other polarity, which is represented by our metabolism. And old school alchemy, they call this the salt and the sulfur, or the body and the soul. And then that really connects with the rhythms, the central rhythms of the heart, and tunes us into those larger patterns and perceiving those patterns that are abundant in nature all the time, but aren't perceptible with the outer senses. So right away, used properly, plant medicine is going to unify those polarities. And that's why you have more of a unifying experience and great insights and all sorts of things that come with many types of plant medicine. Now, Jiao Gulan, which is just my thing, I got into it a long time ago and I've been growing it for a lot of years now. And this is, my second farm where I've grown it in large scale. If you look at it pharmacologically, the way a Western mind would, you say, well, it has certain adaptogenic qualities. It has certain elements in it that they pick apart in the lab. They find out it's more potent, for all that good stuff than ginseng. It actually repairs telomeres, which are the terminal endpoints of DNA. So in that regard, it could do some bodily repair and everything. And all those things are true. And it also affects cardiovascular function. And just about every function of your body readily responds positively to Jiao Gulan. The Western name for Jiao Gulan is gynostemma. And in the Orient, they said, they called it the tea of immortality. They drank it every day and they just claimed that it prolonged their lives. But I don't really look at things that way, because if you're trying to prolong your life, the first question, whether you're going and studying in the Valley of the Ancients up in the Wuhan Mountains somewhere with some martial artist that's been alive for 500 years, or whether you're drinking immortality tea, why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you're afraid to die, or are you doing it because you want to live? So first off, your intentions are going to dictate the results you get from any practice that you do. And then, of course, immortality, you realize, has nothing to do with the body. But when you come to that realization, then again, you're operating not in the world of polarities, but at the fulcrum of the creative standpoint of those two polarities. And then you're going to be able to manipulate those polarities instead of them manipulating you. So then your body does not have to do, the whole degradation process and decrepitation and things that we associate with, the final stages of old age right before you croak. You can actually be fully functional. You can have your wits about you and be better than ever, regardless of whether you have some outer signs of aging or not. But the real goal is to, use your body as a vehicle for the ascension of your consciousness. And tens of thousands of people have made the ascension where they did not even go through a physical death. That's why somebody a long time ago said the last enemy to overcome is death. And it's been very well documented in places in Asia where they did old school techniques of ascension, which was to prolong the life in the physical body. They had areas where people were alive for many hundreds of years and centuries. So now they say we don't have to go through that because we can just do it internally and make an ascension in a single lifetime and not have to go through the hundreds of years of prolongation, in a physical vehicle. So yeah, all the herbs can assist, I think, including Jaugulan, if you use them properly and understand what they're there for in the first place.
Mm. Yeah, and you reminded me of this folk tale that I just heard the other day of a man who was hung by a king in Scotland and pushed on a wheel to the site of his grave, and miraculously was there to attest to his innocence in court the next day after the king had hung him. So it's a weird story about someone living through a hanging, but I don't doubt this sort of immortality and people being able to ascend and maybe even have a conscious connection between their past life and their present life. I think this is something that is a lost science. It's something that we've unfortunately moved away from as a culture. But I think even in the Western culture, there's evidence of this kind of thing going on. We have incredible stories. I know Chris Bennett is somebody who's written a lot about this, of cannabis being used for this purpose, to ascend out of your body and achieve higher states of consciousness. They would use sort of like these tents and a burner, an incense burner, much like the one they use in a Christian ceremony or Catholic ceremony today, and incense the whole room, and people would be uplifted by this smoke.
Yeah, that there's an occulted practice by the Rosicrucians where the crystallization of their years of study as a initiate would lead to a ceremony where they would essentially, it's kind of like the movie Flatliners, if you're familiar with that, where they would induce a death, a physical body death. So they would literally die, but they did it in a way with a specific plant medicine. So this is not a shamanic journey. This is different. This is not like an ayahuasca trip. You're literally dead. And then they would leave and go to the afterlife, and then they would bring them back. They would revive them. And that was the ultimate kind of sort of, awareness that they would then have as they move into the Rosicrucian order. And this was the great mind altering, I guess, activation, knowing that there is no death. And then now that would be something that would allow them to be fearless and be champions and, brave knights of the divine and all that.
Well, this is Geronimo too. I mean, this is you made the comparison, or the opposite of a comparison, but I would say that the Native Americans had very similar rituals. I'm sure you've heard of the eagle bone ceremony, right? Where you're taken through this tremendous stress on your body, and yeah, it's like a resurrection, almost like 3 days in the tomb kind of thing. And I wonder how universal this is. It seems that it's a part of every culture, from Aborigines to up in the Laplands, all the way down to Peru and here in North America.
I have a great uncle who supposedly knew Geronimo, and there's a book written about him. He was a kind of a Davy Crockett of sorts, who had all sorts of adventures, and is my dad's, I don't know, great uncle. Yeah, fascinating. I was telling Barre about this, I think, a couple of days ago. And Geronimo was a pretty dynamic character for sure, and had almost like an ascended master sort of presence about him.
I heard from a past guest that he was able to interpret, because back when they were fighting the Indians in wars and whatnot, Geronimo was a fierce warrior. He had a reputation that preceded him, and the army, they had these like lookout stations that they would sort of signal to each other with mirrors using Morse code. And the legend was that Geronimo could stand in between two of these towers and know exactly what they were saying, and he'd never learned Morse code. So yeah, he had some mystical lore about him as well.
Yeah, and as you are aware, supposedly they have, was it the skull of Geronimo, skull and bones, as an effigy toward that kind of, I don't know, mysticism of America.
Right. Yeah, that's actually where my interest began. I met a guy from Arizona who traveled to New Haven to pray for Geronimo's desecrated body and help him connect, in the astral back to where he belongs. And yeah, this guy ran into me and definitely planted a bunch of seeds, so to speak, and they have blossomed into a forest. But yeah, I could sit here and bore you guys about all that stuff, but we're not here to talk about, well, not bore, but well, let's get back on track.
It's definitely not boring.
Definitely not. I agree. Well, I do want to maybe bring, some other of the plants that you use outside of just the Immortality tea. Are there any other products that you guys are creating? And products, the wrong word, plant medicines that you guys are creating that you don't think people might know about? Because I hadn't heard of this Immortality tea until I heard you interviewed on the Higher Side Chats.
We grow a lot of herbs, and a lot of them make their way into our teas and so forth. And probably a lot of herbs that most people are aware of. But the key to herbal medicine is understanding how to prepare it. And that goes back to the alchemical process. So you can take, say, ashwagandha, and you can make a tincture out of it. And that is going to have just certain components of the three main components that make up all the kingdoms of nature. Tinctures are typically just the sulfur, the essence. Now, if you understand how to take the spirit out of that plant, in other words, make a wine out of it, then put it through a chain of distillations until you get very high octane spirits, that is the spirit or the mercury of that plant. That's the mercurial element that we would consider the prana, the chi of that oversoul of that particular plant species. It's the whole reason for its existence, the whole consciousness projection into congealed matter in the first place. That's the canvas that then will be used in order to incorporate the inorganic and organic elements that create eventually the whole plant and the resonance that will make those things come into the form and function of that particular plant. So now you've got the spirit. Now you take that plant essence or that plant matter, and there's different ways to do it and to concentrate it greatly, depending what your goal is, and to remove the essence. That essence we call the sulfur. That's the individualized soul, like, you, Mark, myself, Mike, we're all individualized essences of the creator. So the plants have more of an oversoul kind of thing, but each plant is going to represent that essence of that creation within the plant kingdom. So now you extract that essence with the spirit from the same plant. That's the key. Because the mercurial element that's responsible for the creation of that consciousness of that plant, if that is used rather than just some alcohol that you buy from some other source, it's going to have a whole different effect as far as extracting the essence in a very special way. Now, when you take the plant matter that no longer has the essence in it, that has the salt, which is the body, the final congealment into form. And so you purify that, and there's ways to do it. And the final purified form are these salts, which are the mathematical proportion elements that make that herb function the way it functions. For instance, ashwagandha versus jiao gulan. That element, proportion of elements, is going to create a very precise resonance that is then going to be a capacitor for the resonance that starts in the heavens above, if we want to think of it that way, within the constellations, the 7 sacred planets. That is then going to filter down through the ethers sequentially, and that's a whole different discussion, into its final form. But that proportion of inorganic elements is going to collect the resonance that makes that plant and its function and form unique with all the other types of in the plant kingdom. Now you put all of those three things together, and not only do you have the whole thing, but you've purified each of those elements. You've elevated each of those elements because you put them through many processes individually before you recombine them. Now, when you take that into your body, not only are you going to get the effects of, say, ashwagandha, but you're going to get it in a very potentized way, in a very purified way, because that plant, you have actually put it through a laboratory process, which is akin to the Ascension. And that is also going to feed the awareness in all the three aspects of your being as well. Real different than buying a tincture off the shelf at the health food store. So I don't so much go after exotic strains of herbs that nobody's ever heard of. What I do is put them through processes in order to achieve the end goal, and then also create formulations with different plants or elements from those plants to create a whole different composite in the first place. It's going to be way different than ashwagandha, even though it's got, either the sulfur, the spirits, or the salt from ashwagandha, or all three. And when you go back to the masters of herbalism in Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic, they weren't running things through the lab to find a chemical constituent. They were looking at things in exactly this way and becoming creators of refinement of energy. They were participating in transmutation. And that's what our lifetimes are about. It's a transmutation process. It's about introspection, purification, elevation, and eventually ascension. So plant medicines should really mimic that whole process.
Well, thank you for answering my poorly worded question with such a well-detailed response, because that is exactly where I was hoping to go, and you saved me a lot of rambling to get there. So well said, very eloquent. And yeah, I think that, when it comes to this process, people will start to realize that so few of our own, staples, what we call staples, are treated in this same way. We have all these mass-produced agricultural products that we're given in our diet, and I wonder how little we'd have to rely on the medical establishment if we treated all of our food with this same process from seed to fruit. I mean, this isn't something that's restricted to herbs. You can do this with an ear of corn. You can do this with potatoes, right?
Well, there's a lack of the sacred in society, and that is a sacred science that Barre just explained. I guess you call Spagyricism, and is an ancient practice that is a mimicry of the kind of as above, so below concept, right? It's a microcosm of being a part of the divine creator. And so we've, of course, been, due to reductionist scientism, the religion of today, we have lost that sacred connection to, as you rightfully said, growing an ear of corn or having a bed of potatoes, because you're right. They're not only are the herbs we grow treated in this way, but they're also grown in a biodynamic fashion that is sacred. Right? From where we decide to actually plant the seed to how the structure of the bed is geometrically in relation to the cosmos, to the stars and all of that. It's all holistic. We're all in this soup of the ether. And that ether has been, hidden from the mainstream, from modern science, in the modern realm of scientism. So because of that, everything has been reduced to its chemical nature. And because of that, we are sick. And so the answer, of course, is more of the same. So it's this nasty cycle of death. And to get out of that, what do? We separate. We leave normie world and we live in what we call the magical land, which is just a mindset of living in a magical realm where we understand the true divine sciences and how this all works.
Yeah, and it is difficult when you're one of many people who feels this way, hence the name of my show. My family thinks I'm crazy. It's easy to
We need to invert that title, by the way, Mark. It should be, I think my family's crazy.
That would be that could be a great offshoot. Maybe I'll let my girlfriend take that title in the show and she could do that. But yeah, I definitely feel like my family, if I could talk them into it, would understand this magical realm. They could be there. I really, truly, at the center of my heart, believe it. But there's so much barrier, obstacle, their own choice, their own free will. And also I've learned over the past, course of this podcast, like it's not part of my destiny to control them. And even if I think it's a solution that they may need, it's ultimately up to them to decide on whether or not they're going to do it or not. So yeah, I think you're spot on. We need to be able to separate from this society that's sickening us. It's no measurement of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. That's a quote that I have on my website because I feel like it's exactly why this show is what it is. Me talking to brilliant folks like yourselves about ways that we can ultimately improve our situation here. And sometimes, it takes sort of, leaving the herd to be able to do that.
Well, here's the key, Mark, from what I've found is you're right. Being the savior is never going to work because then you're also factoring ego and in you're essentially recreating the problem by trying to force something down somebody's throat or trying to be the savior for them. Well, that's your ego. That's your force. Now you are forcing something, right? That is violence in a way, which is interesting. However, if we start living and practicing what we talk about, right? Walking the walk, then from what I found anecdotally, just in my life and Barre and everybody I know that's really trying to practice what we preach, our lives are pretty groovy, man. Like we're having a lot of fun. We're healthy. We have great relationships, building community. We're living in abundance. We're eating great food and having a lot of fun. Like I just river rafted this weekend with a bunch of folks from Alfa Vedic. Our community came up to hang out and from Music and Sky, had a blast, just such a great time. This has basically been every weekend this summer, having these amazing hangouts and doing all this fun stuff. And so my point of bringing this up is that like some of my more quote unquote normie family members who are taking jabs and going to doctors and they're really suffering, man. They're having a lot of problems and having a hard time. And so hopefully over time they can kind of contrast their life with our lives and see, hey, maybe there's something those wackos are doing that's working. And maybe I should start to listen to those guys and putting some of that into practice. So I feel like that is the best way to move forward and just let your beautiful life shine. And as an example of, practicing what you preach.
Yeah. Well said. Well, Dr. Barre, I'd like to hear your final thoughts. I'd also like to give you both an opportunity to tell people where they can go to become a part of the Alfa Vedic community, because we do have a large portion of our audience in California on the West Coast. So I'm sure a lot of people are out there who would love to get involved. But the best way to start is go to alfavedic.com, check out the podcast that you do. It's a part of the Alt Media United Cooperative. I appreciate you guys joining up. We need more brilliant folks like yourselves shining this light in the decentralized way, independently. But yeah, what are your closing thoughts, Mr. Dr. Lando?
Well, we've talked a lot about creating parallel universes, and like our farm up here is kind of a prototype to that end. But we need angels everywhere, and if you find yourself in a city, it doesn't mean you got to get out. Maybe it's where you're supposed to be. And, we talked about being a capacitor, like a little element, that makes a plant medicine work. Well, each one of us is a capacitor in a larger universal sense. So if you find yourself in the middle of a city, you are then a conduit to bring in that resonance, that level of consciousness. And, you mentioned that some of the cities and places, around where you live, maybe, in the city are like scabs. Well, they need to be healed. And that is going to happen. So some of us are taking on the role of doing like what we're doing. Some may be in an area like, where you are. Some people might find themselves in an apartment without even a front yard. That's okay. You still have a kitchen sink. You still have your consciousness that can transmute that water into making a wonderful sprout garden in your kitchen sink. You can do things wherever you're at. So I just don't want people to go away from this feeling discouraged at, oh, how the hell am I going to do all this, when I'm stuck here in the city on my job. And it brings us to the final point, which is, there's no right or wrong way of doing anything. There's only experience, and experience is the solution. So I didn't get to where am presently overnight. I've had a lot of experience along the way. I also have a lot of memory of prior experiences of going around the karmic clock, that are now becoming obvious as far as why this lifetime has precipitated certain things that I'm experiencing. But you take that normie, we'll call them, that's, maybe just not on board with what we're talking about, but they are creating an experience through that, whether they're getting a shot in the arm that's going to, create a heart attack or just all the crazy things that people are exposing themselves to these days. Maybe that's harsh, but it's an experience, and that will bring them back to spirit ultimately. And I look back in my life, some of the harshest things I've gone through that I wouldn't want to go through again are the things I have the fondest memories about, because I now in hindsight see the purpose. So just to reframe everything in that perspective, it also makes it a lot easier for us to leave each other alone when we look at things that way. And, just it's a little tough when they won't leave you alone, but, we deal with it, and that's part of our experience too. So I'll let Mike finish up here. And also Mike's much better at giving the infomercial for Alpha Vedic and everything we're doing. So I'll let him complete that.
Oh, man. That was brilliant, Barre, and so perfectly said in terms of what the individual experience is for everyone in this realm, and to have compassion for everybody. That is one of the key elements towards the Ascension process. In the initiation of the 7 initiations towards Ascension, the first one is, just understanding God's law or God's will, and by living by God's will, and by living in a peaceful manner that isn't bringing, pain and misery to others through your own benediction or your own savior complex. So yeah, everybody, I don't even really love the term normie, but I just use it because I think we all understand what that means. But really what I meant by, walking the walk, walking the talk, or whatever, is more of a spiritual higher plane sort of mentality, and you can do that anywhere. So yeah, we need those bright lights in the cities. We need people. As a systems designer, I look at this as a network we're creating, and we need nodes everywhere. So we need nodes in the darkest, deepest corners of the urban environment. And I have friends literally doing that in Los Angeles. The partners that do Music and Sky with me live in LA, and they are holding the light. And there's a lot of amazing people actually that were normies just 2 years ago that are in our community now, that have quote unquote woken up. So it's happening in droves right now, and it's very exciting to watch. And that's what Alpha Vedic really is all about in the end. It's an educational platform. We do that through our podcast, through our community engagements on our Telegram channel, but also with the workshops we are scheduling out for our community. And that is really, in the end, it is all about community. It's about us coming together as a large network across the world to spread the love and harmony that comes from understanding the true nature of this reality, of the spiritual science, as Steiner called it. And so that's what Alpha Vedic's mission is obviously living by the way, living in the way, in the best way that we can. And so we've chosen to move out here in this beautiful land, but we also have partners that live down south in SoCal, like Barre's son, who does all of our design. They live down now they've moved to outside of LA, but they live in Ventura County because he's a surfer kid. and loves the beach, and that's great. They're holding the light down there. So that being said, yeah, alphavedic.com is where you can find us. We have a great community on Telegram, t.me/alphavedic. Anyone can join that, and that is a fantastic community. Amazing conversations going on there daily. We're also taking massive strides towards having our own private community on our own platform and getting off Patreon, which we currently are still using. Because of censorship and, being in that normie world, we want to, once again, walk the talk the walk. So that's what we're doing with our private membership platform that's coming out shortly on alphavedic.com. You'll be able to join that. And essentially, it's a full custom social media apparatus. There's messaging, forums, groups, workshops that'll be going through that, almost like an online university, but also a way to connect with others that are like-minded. And that is all through our own system, which is all open source and decentralized, and will be eventually running on Cordal. Cordal, by the way, is an amazing project. Go check it out. I'm one of the founders in that, cordal.org. We are rebuilding the internet and rebuilding a whole new net. Well, we're using the original apparatus of the internet to essentially create a new network that isn't on the World Wide Web. And that's a fully decentralized, open source, permissionless platform that is not mainstream crypto. So check that out. And then what came out of Alpha Vedic for me was Music and Sky, which was just, I wanted to have in-person gatherings that took me back to my roots as an underground house DJ. So that's what Music and Sky is. It's kind of blending the Alpha Vedic aesthetic of awareness and awakening with the sort of underground roots that I came from. So, dancing and music and art and counterculture all rolled into one. And that's called Music and Sky. And it's been an amazing journey with that. And hopefully one of these days we'll get Barre to come out and be a featured keynote speaker. It's hard to get him away from the farm because it's just so much work involved with that. But if you do have a lot of people in California that are your listener, well, guess what? Music and Sky takes place in California. We are holding the light in California. We believe in the beauty of California. And so Music and Sky is actually happening again, October 13th through the 16th in the Cuyama Valley in the Central Valley in California, outside of kind of north of Ojai, in this beautiful location. And it is a fully immersive camp out where we do everything from ice baths and yoga, meditation. We go deep into things like the terrain and real law. And it's a solutions focused, community, family friendly event. And we have ecstatic dance and DJs and bands. And we have a 24/7 art gallery going and just all sorts of amazing stuff. So if this is something that really interests you, you can go to musicandsky.com. We just launched. Tickets are now open. And your boy, Chance Garton, is probably coming out. I'm talking with Chance to come out and do some biofield tuning workshops and some sound therapy stuff. He's super pumped to come out and hang. Mark, you of course have an open invitation. Thank you. Coming all the way across from the East Coast can be a little taxing, I know, but we are actually decentralizing Music and Sky too. We'll have workshops going where we'll this go around where if you're interested in throwing your own Music and Sky, we will basically train you on how to do that. We will support you. And so we can have Music and Skies all over the world. So we already have some people interested in doing a New York or an East Coast based Music and Sky, and also a Miami based Music and Sky. So that might be something, Mark, you could hit up easier. And that can all be found at musicandsky.com, alphavedic.com. That's ALFAVEDIC.com. And yeah, that is what we're up to.
Right on. Yeah. And I'll be sure to link all that in the description. I hope that everyone listening follows up, and there is so much to talk about. I'd love to have you both on individually again. I had a weird morning, so I hope my energy didn't rub off on you guys, but you definitely lifted my spirits, each in your own unique way. So yeah, I'd love to have you back on individually. And Mike, I do a show specifically about technology, so I'd love to have you on to talk about Cordal and what you're doing with this decentralized internet community, because we need more projects like that. But for now, folks, enjoy the moment wherever you are in the now. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And what a great conversation with Dr. Barre Lando and Mike Winner. You can find more from them at the Alpha Vedic podcast.
You can listen to it on whichever podcast app you're listening right now. They have a Rockfin, they have a YouTube, and they have a lot of great information and wisdom to share, as you could tell from this conversation. We got into some interesting stuff, some controversial stuff. I forgot Cancer, the big C. I really do want to tackle more episodes in this realm where we're talking about uncomfortable medical subjects. At least they're uncomfortable for me. I don't know, maybe I'm squeamish or something. Maybe it's because I have family members that I care deeply about who suffer from certain ailments that we might find some unsettling truths about through great conversations like the ones we had today and this week. It's a great week. Episode 194, we're flying towards episode 200, and I have some really excellent guests planned for that big anniversary episode number. We're flying through the year much faster. We hit our 100th episode anniversary in October, so I'm kind of kicking up the gas here, hitting the gas, kicking up speed, so to speak, by hitting this 200th anniversary a month sooner than we did last year. We're just putting out so many episodes, I can't even keep up with the schedule that we've set forth, and that's fine. 12 or 13 episodes a month. How many other podcasts are you aware of that even put out that much amazing content for free every month? I don't know many. And if you have any, get them in touch with me. I'd love to have them on the show. Maybe we can join forces and they can be a part of altmediaunited.com. I do a lot of things around here, folks. I'm trying to keep this my full-time job, and I can't do it without your support. This month is going to be tough with bills, and I have considered going and getting a part-time job in order to make ends meet. So I might have to do that. Not unless we can get some support. And I know there's people out there who have supported generously in the past. I'm calling on you guys. Help me out if you can, if you could spare it. And I'm calling on new folks too. People who maybe you've listened to every episode. Maybe you've listened to 5 or 10. Whatever value I've brought to your life with this show, please send that value back, because I am a real man, a real human being over here on the other end of this laptop and microphone, and I'm pouring my heart into this art. I'm pouring my heart into this art, and I don't think you guys want to hear my drama, my stories, my complaints. Maybe you do. I'll tell you what, yesterday I was mowing the lawn here at the apartment building, and the neighbor came out and yelled at me, accusing me of slamming my door. This is so ridiculous. I never slam my own front door, the front door that I'm paying for. And this woman has the nerve. She's only spoke to me twice, both times asking me to do things. I don't work for her. I work for the landlord. I mow the lawn for the landlord. And she's got the nerve to come after me while I'm mowing the lawn, telling me, oh, you better stop slamming your door. Like I said, I never slam my door. I am a Zen man. I like to keep the peace and tread lightly, quietly. That was frustrating, but as you may have heard, I have not been feeling that great lately, and I've finally got some energy back. I've been going outside. I think I'm going to go for a swim in the river today. We'll see. Just trying to make this dream come true. The dream of not working for the system. The dream of doing something fulfilling. And I know many of you out there have similar aspirations, and I support you. I hope this show inspires you to take the steps you need to step outside of the norm, step out of the routine, the humdrum, the mundane, and maybe have your own Alfa Vedic farm one day. Maybe have your own podcast. Maybe have your own self-sufficient, sustainable, biodynamic property. where you can support you and your loved ones for the rest of your life. That's my goal. I want to find a property like they got out there in California way. I want to find myself a little piece of the pie. You know what I'm saying? It might not be out in California way with Dr. Barre, Lando, and Mike Winter, but it's going to be somewhere, folks. And this podcast is a vessel to take me and my loved ones there. I hope all of you can come along with me. And I hope that this podcast carries with me through that so I can consistently share my thoughts and the thoughts of all these brilliant people who I synchronistically just happen to get in touch with. There's no magic going on my end. Yeah, I'm Mystic Mark, but I'm just following the flow that life reveals and shows. I am just following that eternal river of the ever-expanding now. And that's why I want to create the Scene Edition 1, 2, 3, 4, and however many we'll create to help you all understand the strange mystic philosophy that I have cultivated through my short time on the planet. The mystic philosophy that carries through this podcast, my interviews, my questions, my thoughts, all of the reasons why my family thinks I'm crazy. I've been leading a mystical philosophy adamantly. I've lived my life by that philosophy. Where others may have compromised, I have not. And it's not always put me in the best situations. Some situations I had to get myself out of. Some of those situations were negative, dangerous, possibly risky towards my soul's illumination. So I'm not saying I'm special or unique. I think, as a matter of fact, I'm pretty normal. I think everybody can follow their own path in the way I have, in their own unique way. There are certain life circumstances that pushed it in for me, made it happen for me in a way that I guess I had no control over. Martial arts, becoming a fighter in school, and then having to learn how to get my way out of that negativity and become solid and sure and confident in myself. And then from there, learning how to navigate this weird society that we're in. I've had many different jobs, many different hats, and finally I'm doing something where it seems like I'm connecting not only with my higher calling, but with many awesome people. Not just the guests on the show, but the listeners, you listening. So many of you have become supporters of this podcast, and I've gotten to know you better, and I hope to continue to get to know you all. I know I've been absent from doing any sort of Zoom meetups, but it's summertime. Everybody's out and doing fun stuff. When the weather cools down a bit, we're going to do some more Patreon meetups because I want to get in touch with the people, and my family thinks I'm crazy, podcast people, all of you. So if you want to get involved with that, you want to get to know me, you want to get to know what's going on in the scene, because we do have a lot of that on the Patreon. Sign up for the Patreon, patreon.com/MFTIC, and support this show, support me. Obviously, one-time donations are extremely helpful. Those can be sent via PayPal, Cash App, or Venmo. But the supporters on Patreon, you guys get special treatment. You get bonus content, audio content, you get video content. Rockfin has video content as well, but I also put that on the Patreon. So please, folks, help us out, support us on Patreon, support us with a one-time donation, join in the Telegram community, and enjoy the moment wherever you are in the now. Thank you for listening, everybody, and I love you all. Have a great moment wherever you are in the now.
I'm a little
extraterrestrial, trying to stay human in a cesspool of professionals. But I confess too much off of the tongue. All my aunties and my uncles shield the ears of the young. I be saying shit and they don't know where it's coming from. In like 100 years we went Zarbomba from guns. Check the facts, check the Fed, check the stars. Stanley Mines was murked for a water fuel cell car. To each their own, you can stick with your old ways, but eat the rich and drink the motherfucking Kool-Aid. And I can see the red on your lip stain. White skin, blue collar, pure American made. Fuck it. You can keep your blood-soaked heritage and run the soul off the moon-landed narrative. Yeah, my girl thinks that I'm embarrassing. My folks think I'm nuts, but never question the parenting. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pack thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. You might think that I'm off in the deep end. One too many Netflix docs on the weekends. But check the budget for a military defense. Tell me we ain't scared of something not within reason. Steel beams, another 1492. And 9/11 was the red, white, and blue. And you be lit off the floor ride and ain't got a clue. All your dreams just shit on a Rockefeller shoes. Don't believe a damn thing a politician ever said. Ain't one brick left to gold up in the Fed. They still got bricks of cocaine to make crack. Oxy's killing the working class, FDA's whack. Talking like this, got kin talking behind backs. Too much to unpack, so they talk smack. And I'm just trying to converse with my clan, but it ain't fam. So I'm here setting up camp. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pack thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. My family thinks I'm crazy. Maybe, maybe, maybe. Just maybe. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an atheist, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Yeah, I think one thing I've learned is you can't rule anything out.